Wrestle Machine Learning Time. Here are stories about Randy Macho Man Savage, the When Worlds Collide pay-per-view. November 14, 1994 Observer Newsletter, Savage/WWF relationship falls apart, When Worlds Collide pay-per-view with one of the best matches of the 90s, another WCW lawsuit, tons more. By Observer staff. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228. Campbell, California 950091228 November 14, 1994. When Worlds Collide. Thumbs up 263, 97.8%. Thumbs down 401, 5%. In the middle 200, 7%. Best match poll. Santo and Octagon vs Machine and Guerrero 199 votes. Conan vs Perro Aguayo 34 votes. Mysterio Jr. and Metal and Lover vs Guerrera and Psicosis and Boyfriend 25 votes. Espectrito and Estrada vs Octagon Cheeto and Sagrada 21 votes. Worst match poll. Santana and Pegasus and Scorpio vs Panther and Parka and Estrada 54 votes. Conan vs Perro Aguayo 37 votes. Mysterio Jr. and Metal and Lover vs Guerrera and Psicosis and Boyfriend 15 votes. Based on phone calls and fax messages to the Observer as of Tuesday, 11/8. Margin of error, probably not a whole lot this time out. In a stunning move, the 10-year relationship of the World Wrestling Federation and Randy Savage, Randy Poffo, came to an end over the weekend with Savage in the midst of serious negotiations with World Championship Wrestling. Savage, who turns 42 on November 15, had apparently mended fences with Hulk Hogan after a bitter out-of-the-ring hatred between the two stemming from Savage's much-publicized 1992 divorce. Savage went so far as to publicly speak out on WWF radio attempting to bury Hogan personally last year in regard to both his marriage breakup and Hogan's comments on steroids on Arsenio Hall and how it hurt the business. However, in a recent newspaper article, when the subject of the Flair-Hogan match in WCW was brought up, Savage claimed he was friends with Hogan and didn't want to say anything bad about him but then tried to downplay the match by saying how the WWF was number one. Apparently it was Hogan or Jimmy Hart who, wanting to relive his glory days against the opponent that he drew more money with than any other, patched things up to allow negotiations to bring Savage to WCW to feud with Hogan, although Savage will come in as a babyface and turn during the summer to set up a major fall program in a scenario that looks to be a repeated format they'll be using often during Hogan's WCW tenure, and even lined Savage up with a guest shot on Baywatch over the last few weeks. Word we get at press time is that Savage will debut at Starrcade making a guest appearance and will debut in the ring at the January 25, 1995 Clash of Champions in Hampton, Virginia, probably in a tag match with Hogan against Butcher and Avalanche. Although the deal with WCW apparently hadn't been completed, WWF President Vince McMahon apparently received word of the serious negotiations going on between Savage and Eric Bischoff and it led to the split between the two. Savage was doing promos for being a special ref for the Backlund Hart title rematch on November 26 at Madison Square Garden as recently as 1 week ago. Publicly, McMahon did something he had never done before on the live Monday Night Raw on November 7, saying Savage and the WWF had failed to come to terms on a new contract and heavily praised Savage for the all good he had done the company and talked of being a personal fan of Savage and wishing him well in whatever endeavors he does in the future. Reports are there are a lot of shocked people in the WWF over Savage leaving, because even though his days as their big money draw were over, he was still the single wrestler most identified with WWF and the big link to the glory days, and McMahon considered him a good friend. We've received no word on what range of dollar signs it took to lure Savage from the WWF other than as of about a week to 10 days before press time, Savage reportedly was asking for $600,000 per year and WCW was unwilling to go that high. Apparently Hogan and WCW's idea regarding the eventual Hogan-Savage feud could and it has been discussed would include Savage's ex-wife Elizabeth Hewlett. Hewlett has a no-compete clause signed as part of her release from the WWF in 1992 that expires early next year and at one point this past year had expressed interest in joining WCW but whatever talks were considered were broken up before they started due to her no-compete clause. Apparently the idea would involve an updated version of the angle that led to WrestleMania V, which was the highest-grossing wrestling event of all time, probably a shoot-work angle throwing the divorce in as part of the angle. The beginnings of the negotiations with Savage preceded the Hogan-Flair match, which from virtually all independent reports has to be considered a huge disappointment. Further reports this past week from independent sources that track pay-per-view buys have pinpointed the buy rate at approximately 0.97. WCW sources publicly are insisting the show did a 1.45 and remain furious at suggestions otherwise, although the wrestlers were actually told at the Disney tapings it did a 1.6, and other sources within WCW are saying anything from 0.9 to 1.4. There continues to be a lot of concern, coming off this disappointment, for the Starrcade pay-per-view, the first show of the new WCW Out with the Old and In with the Old regime, billed as Triple Threat, with a triple main event consisting of 4 matches that we know of. Hulk Hogan vs. The Butcher, Ed Brutus Beefcake Leslie, for the WCW title. Titan Sports owns a trademark on both Brutus Beefcake and the wrestling character of the Barber, so Leslie couldn't use any of those 3 names as his WCW ring name. Sting vs. Avalanche, Jim Duggan vs. Vader, and Mr. T vs. Kevin Sullivan, which obviously will come out of an angle at the 11/16 Clash. After a lot of scary moments, the latest of what has become far too frequent injuries for wrestling craziest Daredevil Sabu, turned out to be not as serious as it originally appeared. Sabu was wrestling Chris Benoit at the 11/5 CCW Arena show in Philadelphia. When 2 o'clock into the match, there was a miscommunication regarding a move and Sabu took a backdrop where he attempted a full 1.5 flip over and instead of making it, landed on his head. Apparently Sabu told manager Paul E. Dangerously to stop the match immediately because he believed he had broken his neck and was taken to the hospital that night. Considering Sabu insisted on going on a few weeks ago in Hamburg, Pennsylvania after cracking his ribs early in a match with Cactus Jack, then after catching his breath doing several suicidal high spots, the idea that he wanted the match stopped with his mental toughness and borderline insanity tells you just how much pain he must have been in. Sabu's injuries were a bruised spine, a cracked vertebrae and some nerve damage in his shoulder, and he's expected out of action probably until the 11/19 Philadelphia show. He was scheduled to run his own show this week in Inkster, Michigan. We didn't receive official word the show would be postponed, although it was widely expected that would be the case. The biggest women's wrestling extravaganza in history, the 8-hour marathon with 22 matches at the Tokyo Dome on November 20th, was pretty much officially announced in its entirety this past week. Word we get is they expect a crowd in excess of 30,000 fans, which would be a gate in the range of $3 million because of the high-scale ticket prices, since the show has been so well hyped for so long and features the Japanese retirement of Akira Hokuto, who is largely respected as the greatest female all-around worker in history. Lineup has 1. Chapari Dosari, AJW, and Bomber Chime, Gia Promotions, versus Hiro Miyagi and Hiromi Sugo, JWP Team. 2. Midget Tag Team Match. 3. Kandi Akutsu, JWP, defends the Japanese Junior Heavyweight title versus Rita Mata, AJW, in a match that is also the finals of the Interpromotional Japanese Junior Tournament. 4. Suzuka Minami, AJW, versus Kaoru Maeda, Gia Promotions. 5. In a 5-round kickboxing match, AJW's Kumiko Maekawa versus Tsuyomi Usa, female kickboxer. 6. Doris Brainbow, amateur wrestler from France, versus Kyoko Hamaguchi, Japanese national amateur wrestling champion, daughter of pro wrestler Animal Hamaguchi, making her pro debut. 7. Mika Yamamoto versus Ana Gomez. 8. Kaoru Ito, AJW, versus Miko Ishimata, woman shoot boxer, Japanese sport where the combatants fight with gloves but wrestling moves are allowed as well as boxing. 9. Chigusai Nagayo, Gia, versus Reggie Bennett, AJW. 10. Toshio Yamada and Tomoko Watanabe, AJW, versus Shinobu Kandori and Mikiko Futagami, LLPW. 11. Uwa Mexican Promotion, Tag Team title with Atsuko Mita and Mima Shimoda, AJW, versus Yoshikura Nai and Michika Nagashima, LLPW. 12. Legends match with Jaguar Yokota and Bison Kimura versus Lioness Asuka and Yumi Ogura. 13. Blizzard Yuki, AJW Saki Hasegawa debuting a new gimmick based on a popular TV animated and cartoon character in a cross-marketing deal, versus Mariko Yoshida, AJW. 14. First round of the Best in the World Tournament, Yumiko Hata, AJW, versus Combat Toyota, FMW. 15. Tournament continues with Akira Hokuto, AJW, versus Eagle Sawai, LLPW. 16. Tournament continues with Asia Kong, AJW, versus Manami Toyota, AJW. 17. Takako Inoue, AJW, and Cutie Suzuki, JWP, versus Megumi Kudo, FMW, and Hikari Fukuoka, JWP, 18 and 19, Best in the World Semifinals, 20, Alundra Blaze defends WWF Women's title against Bull Nakano, 21, a martial arts match with Kyoko Inoue. It was announced her opponent would be Lucia Rauker, not sure of spelling, the Dutch woman reputed to be the toughest woman on earth, although we have since received reports that match may have fallen apart. 22, Finals of the tournament. A monkey wrench may have been thrown into the tournament. JWP's Dynamite Kansai, who if my predictions on how it would go, would face Hokuto in the finals, was injured on November 6 at Tokyo Karaku and Hall as was said to be questionable for the tournament. Kansai was in a tag match and Fukuoka debuted a moonsault foot stomp, moonsault off the top rope landing with both feet on Kansai's stomach, and didn't hit right and injured Kansai's ribs. Because we'll be in Japan for extensive coverage of the Dome show, there will be no 11/28 Observer. Next week's issue will go out on time, and we'll come back with one issue immediately after Thanksgiving that will cover the 11/16 Clash, the 11/18 AAA New Japan TV taping show in Hiroshima Green Dome, the 11/20 Dome and the 11/23 Survivor Series with probably no other news, which would be the fourth issue of the current set. We'll try and immediately get back on schedule 3 days later with the first issue of the next set to cover all the news from the interim period, including 11/19 ECW show and 11/19 NWA tournament and what is almost sure to be a ton of news from that time period. The biggest show put on by a foreign-based promotion ever in the United States took place 11/6 at the Los Angeles Sports Arena, When Worlds Collide, the AAA IWCW produced pay-per-view event. No buy rate figures will be available until the end of the week, but due to botched up television promotion of the pay-per-view, the buy rate isn't expected to be anything special. The show officially drew 12,024 paid, about 13,000 total in the building set up for 16,000, and $202,465. Of the 5 Los Angeles AAA IWC house shows over the past 15 months, this was the third biggest crowd and gate and also the third best show. Ironically, of the 5 shows, both the gate and quality of the shows rated 1 through 5 would be in the same order, with the debut show as the best show they've run, followed by March '94, this show, the November '93, and bringing up the rear both in show quality and gate was the August '94 show. It was the strongest of the 5 lineups on paper and in drawing power, but didn't sell out. For whatever this is worth, the number of non-Mexican American fans seemed much higher than at any of the previous 5 shows. The response to the poll as far as comments go was every bit as overwhelmingly positive as the up/down ratio indicates, if not more. A huge percentage rated the show as the best pay-per-view of the year, many saying the best in many years, some saying the best ever. Of the 6 non-thumbs-up votes, 4 of them specifically stated the quality of the matches was a positive but felt it was unforgivable for a show advertised as lasting 250 to end more than 40 minutes early, which is an inarguable point. The vast majority, for the first time ever in our poll, wouldn't even list a worst match, with most saying no match on the show deserved the label. The poll response was the third most positive poll result in the history of The Observer, trailing only WCW shows in 1989 headlined by Flair vs. Steamboat in Nashville, 100%, and Flair vs. Funk in Troy, New York, 99.8%, 2 of the legendary matches in pro wrestling history. The announcing was also heavily praised and probably got more comments than on any pay-per-view I can recall. The duo of Chris Cruz and Mike Tenay, the former doing his first pay-per-view broadcast and the latter doing his first television wrestling broadcast of any kind, introduced a new product and brought the product to life, individualizing all the personalities, did an excellent job in getting across the storylines and background, and imparted their audience with more facts and tidbits than any announcing team on any pay-per-view in history. While recognizing Tenay as easily the most well-researched and prepared announcer ever on a pay-per-view show and probably the only person in the country who could have pulled off this incredibly difficult assignment, my feelings on the announcing, an element far more important in introducing new wrestlers and a new style to the vast majority of their audience than any pay-per-view in history except possibly UFI for the same reasons, was very positive overall, but there were definite flaws. As mentioned before, they did an excellent job individualizing the wrestlers, breaking away from the job most lazy announcers would have done in just sleepwalking through a bunch of foreign names as we've seen done countless times before, particularly from WCW. Between that and educating the audience to new rules and a new style and getting virtually every key point needed across ahead of time, which was no mean feat, they did a great job. Even Cruz doing the broadcast didn't seem to understand the captain's fall aspect of the rules. To be honest, I even get confused about that, And the announcing intensity didn't go up and down with the ups and downs of the matches until the main event, where the two did an excellent job. I didn't feel they got the intensity and drama of the hair versus mask match over as well as it was in the building until perhaps the final minute, nor the quality of the moves over. Live, that match was an unquestionable 5-star match, and on pay-per-view on the English feed didn't come off as a 5-star match. They did an absolutely tremendous job of getting the importance of the masks, particularly Sando's, over, but then when the mask was in incredible jeopardy, they didn't get that jeopardy that was so huge in the building over to the television viewers. Oftentimes while incredible moves were going on and even near falls, they weren't calling them, which is the main drawback to the announcing in the Japanese-style semi-final match. It was a weird situation because a typical AAA match starts off slow for the first 5 o'clock and builds to big finishes 3 times, and those slow spots are perfect for the needed education, but because everyone panicked about time, the wrestlers in the ring went out too fast and there were no slow spots all night. They were in as difficult a position as any announcing duo ever, not just because of having to introduce a new product to a novice audience but because of the political instability of 3 promotions with no communication at all between them trying to run the same show at the same time, and because of being assigned by WCW and not AAA, superlatives had to be tempered so as to not upset WCW higher-ups who would be embarrassed remarks that would lead the audience to making a comparison between the two products. Ironically, bilingual readers who saw the Spanish feed commented the mask versus hair match was easy 5 stars, just as most I spoke with live did, an opinion apparently shared by only a small percentage who saw it on pay-per-view in English. I also had several other problems from a selling of the product standpoint, and Cruz is constantly harping on the size, or lack thereof, of heel wrestlers Blue Panther and Fuerza Guerrera, which pretty much was the truth but has always in the past been considered a no-no in wrestling broadcasting, where you never give the height of any wrestler less than either 6'0" or 6'2" in height or weight under 210 or 220, depending upon which part of the country and which promoter emphasized what number to the local announcer. In 6 years of Brian Pillman being in WCW, how many times have announcers given his real height? 0. How many times did announcers give Tully Blanchard, or for that matter Ric Flair or Rick Steamboat's real height? 0. 0. 0. Yet Rey Mysterio Jr.'s height and weight, the latter figure no doubt taken right from these pages, which was accurate as of 8 weeks ago but was probably 20 pounds off on Sunday due to sudden weight gain syndrome, was mentioned a half dozen times. But since he's in the underdog role and his lack of size is actually an attribute in some ways, although saying 5'2" does somewhat expose the product. But that still wasn't nearly as bad as in the case of Guerrero or Panther. Giving Guerrero's real height of 5'3" killed much of the heat from a heel in this country when you realize no matter how stiff-sounding the punch noise is and how solid his work is, the guy throwing it is as tall as a 12-year-old girl. This was even worse than Tony Schiavone killing the live heat at the Clash of the Figure 4 that Flair had on Hogan, saying that the hold put pressure on a leg that wasn't the one injured. If US announcers would never, ever state the height of a top heel that was 5'10" or 5'11", or even a face for that matter, for fear of killing the heel aura, imagine what saying 5'3" does. In the second match, a 4-stars match, I felt from the commentary I was watching Pony League Baseball, or the Mexican team in the Little League World Series playing one hell of a great baseball game, but that these weren't major league caliber players, when in fact quality-wise 2 of the 6 guys, Mysterio Jr. and Psicosis, are among the top 10 wrestlers in North America right now. Cruz tried to sell Mysterio Jr. as a guy who someday could be one of the biggest stars in Mexico when he already is an international star since the show was in California and he's a top star there already, or he wouldn't have been on the show to begin with. Between that and the size made me think I'm watching a little kid who is an age group phenom someday could be a great pro rather than a guy who is already a major star and a great worker. They made up for it in the next match by being almost prophetic in regard to Tito Santana standing out in a negative way like a sore thumb before he even did. 10A was excellent in making the product viewer-friendly, not particularly foreign, to the novice audience that had never seen it before, but Cruz's emphasis on Mexico hurt acceptance and marketability of the product by crossover fans in a country that does not support foreign entertainment except as occasional gimmick diversion or within its original ethnic group. The weakness of both announcers is there were keyholes in regard to match storyline that weren't called, sometimes because they were giving background and sometimes because it appeared Cruz didn't know the name of the hold but 10A didn't want to step over him and call play-by-play. I was surprised by the number of comments from people seeing their first show how they expected it to be more different and harder to grasp and instead simply saw it was a faster version of American wrestling with better wrestlers, or commented it was just like watching New Japan Junior Heavyweights. The difference in understanding the importance of this basic concept of the viewer having to believe it's a product aimed at him is important in contrasting the promotion, marketing and announcing of this show with UFI, which is in a similar boat introducing a new style except that it doesn't have the huge ethnic base audience to start out with. UFI is Japanese wrestling more than AAA is Mexican wrestling, since AAA's style is actually a conglomeration of Mexico, Japan and US while UFI is 100% Japanese shoot style, and because UFI never has and never will draw the kind of house show crowds AAA already has done in this country. UFI never promotes its pay-per-view shows in this country as either Japanese wrestling or pro risu, Japanese equivalent of the English term pro wrestling or Spanish term lucha libre, because it would be ineffective marketing it as that in this country. In fact, from a marketing standpoint, using the term in the manner WCW used the terms Mexican wrestling when it's already crossed over into California to an English audience would be marketing death. UFI went so far as to not even market itself as pro wrestling, but shoot wrestling, because of the belief it brings with it a negative stigma when it comes to introducing a new version of the product in 1994, and its commercials that are running like crazy this week emphasizes the fact that are better than pro wrestling because they are real. In that regard, using the term lucha libre isn't as much a marketing negative but Mexican wrestling is. Cruz also mentioned there might be an added match, when there was never any plans for such nor any wrestlers backstage ready to do it, and only emphasized the viewer's feeling of being ripped off when the show ended early. Still, compared with the alternatives, the job Tony Schiavone would have done, or worse yet, Eric Bischoff, he was incredible. Cruz also mentioned time limits in various matches when every match on the show was announced in the ring introductions as no time limit. In addition, the lack of communication between the announcers and those in the truck was evident at the finish when they talked of Cruz going back for a Conan interview, and then just as soon as he was gone, the show went off the air 40 minutes early. The announcers did come off as having more knowledge and credibility than any announcers on a pay-per-view in recent memory, although there was no need to call the crowd a sellout crowd of 18,000 to 20,000 when it wasn't, just because the WCW lead announcers can't tell the truth if their lives would depend on it doesn't mean that's the lead that needs to be followed. Just because it was closer to a sellout or capacity than many WWF sellouts and virtually all WCW capacity crowds is not an excuse to lie when the truth is strong enough hype. WCW made the call to end the show early. One can only speculate as to why. All those interviews that were taped never airing on TBS tells you what company's plan was on what wasn't going to happen. Before the show the directive was that there would be no interviews on the show for fear they didn't want to rush the matches, but hasn't anyone in wrestling ever heard of improv? Isn't that really what the business is all about? The problem all scripted wrestling isn't as good as wrestling with less guidelines is because pro wrestling is best as improv, worst when made antiseptic, and not a script following to begin with. Officially the story was Gary Juster decided to end the show because he felt it was a supercard and ending it at that point would end it on a high note and didn't want to risk dragging it down by doing anything else. Unfortunately, based on calls, the decision was the single only thing that could have dragged the show down. But when it comes right down to it, it was exactly as predicted beforehand. For match quality from start to finish, it was the best pay-per-view of the year. Nothing even close to a bad match. Overall, despite the early ending and other flaws, most of which can be attributed to everyone involved being in the position they were in for the first time ever, it was right up there with Spring Stampede as the top pay-per-view this year. The camera work and directing, handled by the WCW pay-per-view crew, was excellent, much better than the work Mexican crews do on the AAA television show. However, none of the matches were typical AAA trios style with all six all over ringside, so they didn't have as difficult a job keeping up as the Mexican crews would have, but for a novice crew, their performance deserves tremendous praise. The announcers, from WCW, overall did a good, sometimes excellent job, almost amazing for a first-time effort. To WCW's credit, it was a major positive they didn't allow their own wrestlers to appear on the show. Although Pegasus Kid proved to be the exception to the rule that bringing an outside talent to these shows hurts the matches and usually doesn't get over, how many wrestlers are there of his style, versatility and caliber in the world today? Even Too Cold Scorpio had problems and he's a great flyer and has worked in Mexico before, although he would be a plus on these shows if he appears on AAA television first. Tito Santana, for reasons that aren't his fault, looked hopelessly lost and out of place, and you can just imagine how bad Jake Roberts would have been in that match. It's not that Americans shouldn't be used. Love Machine in some aspects is the best all-around performer in the group. Eddie Guerrero was easily the best pure wrestler on the card that night, and Madonna's boyfriend had no problems at all, but all three work with the group. The communication with the wrestlers in regard to time was totally abhorrent, and the real negative is that the matches were all rushed, which wound up ending the show 40 minutes early. I can see how it happened in the early matches, because everyone was so paranoid of going long, and for good reason based on past 4-hour house shows. But when there is 140 left in a show and 2 matches left, and you've got on paper the best match of the show about to go out with 3.5 excellent workers in a tag match who, if need be, can go almost forever, why didn't someone tell them the show is running short and they need a 50-minute match, and instead of them being told they needed to speed up their match of all things? Or why, after they were done, didn't they hold the show up, take an intermission, live, and kill time doing interviews backstage? I hate to even be suspicious of this, because it just may be a series of mistakes that lead one to a wrong conclusion about motives, yet everything continually over the past 9 weeks points to this. WCW was afraid that some personalities and the concept might get over big if it was pushed on television, or if some of the guys were allowed to talk, particularly in the English language, and particularly if they were better than WCW performers. The nature of the thought process in the wrestling business also leads to this conclusion. There appeared to be so much paranoia or total ignorance on WCW's part, and worse, total lack of interest in learning, in all aspects of promotion and execution, that it resulted in botched-up aspects of the show and virtually non-existent promotion of the show except to the Spanish-speaking audience. The show was a better show, ironically enough, to those who were watching the product for the first time and had no expectations, because it is right now the most advanced in-ring wrestling product in the world and was seen for the first time by numerous fans, than for those who were regular viewers. Although the Mask vs. Hair was the single best match I've seen since going to AAA shows, overall judged in comparison with the regular house shows I've seen in Los Angeles and Tijuana this year, it wasn't as good as many of them and couldn't touch Triple Mania 2B in Guadalajara, but was better than TM2C. The regular fans at the sports arena saw the product changes all for the negative, such as the elimination of the standard entrance music. In some cases with American songs like Van Halen's Jump for Love Machine, and Eddie Guerrero had problems being used because of royalty fees because the show was on pay-per-view, although we had heard word that AAA President Antonio Pena was either willing to or had paid royalty rights for one night for those songs. But many entrance songs such as Pero Aguayo, El Hijo del Santo and Blue Panthers associated with the product didn't require royalty fees but still weren't used for reasons nobody had an explanation for. They eliminated the flamboyant individualized entrances with props and models. There wasn't even a ramp, which both major WCW and AAA shows each use for ring entrances. They cut 2 of 3 fall matches down to 1 fall and cut what fans expect to be 3.5 to 4 hour house shows down to 2 hours, all of which will hurt at the gate for AAA when it returns to Los Angeles. A dark match was scheduled live with Al Snow flown in from Ohio. Mondo Guerrero wasn't there to be his foe, but instead they had brought in a wrestler from Northern California, which WCW officials pulled from the show at the last minute. That wasn't a negative to the show at all, since the only people who even knew about it were observer readers, since it was never advertised to the fans there would be a dark match, but serves another illustration at the total communication problems between all sides. Still, when it was over, the comments were the matches were great, but it felt like you were watching AAA wrestlers perform on a WCW show rather than getting the flavor of a AAA show. While there are many things WCW does better than AAA, putting on shows is definitely not one of them. If there is one thing made obvious by attempts from Americans to change anything about the house show aspect of the product is that in 95% of the cases, in hindsight, those changes are negatives. If the aforementioned problems can be worked out before the next show, it still may be, if the buy rate indicates profitability or even anywhere near profitability, because correctly promoted the next pay-per-view should do tons more business than this did. Best for all concerned to continue the @A/IWC/WCW relationship for the short term, but WCW is going to have to give up attempting to interfere with the show aspect because nobody involved with the company besides 10A has a clue what the product really is, why it works, and how to maximize its potential. If they can't do a show without giving up their say-so on the product, it's best for all concerned to go their separate ways now. Ultimately, for AAA to reach its potential in this country, the groups at some point will have to go their separate ways. But until AAA has its own English-language television show, it isn't time for them to make that move unless WCW forces them by not giving up interfering in the show or by another round of reneging on virtually all promised television promotion, which will be the confirmation of all suspicions. Match 1. Mascarita Sagrada and Octagon Cheeto defeated Espectrito and Jarito Estrada in the Minis match in 8:46. Octagon Cheeto and Espectrito did a super opening spot. Unfortunately, The sound went out for about 3 o'clock in this match due to satellite problems. This was during the heels getting heat phase. The finish was the faces comeback with one incredible move after another. Sagrada did a twisting crossbody off the middle rope to the floor on Espectrito, and Octagon Cheeto did a tope onto Estrada. Back in the ring, Sagrada did a moonsault body block on Espectrito for the pin, followed by Octagon Cheeto doing the leg sweep and Octagon special submission on Estrada. The match was excellent, although too short, which was the lone drawback. 4 stars. Match 2. Fuerza Guerrera and Madonna's Boyfriend and Psicosis defeated Rey Mysterio Jr. and Heavy Metal and Latin Lover in 12:54. This was the Rey Mysterio one-man show, with him doing a Frankensteiner off the top rope, a Frankensteiner off the apron onto the floor, etc. Liv Metal blew some spots and sulked in the corner, but they didn't come across on television. Heavy has really been having his problems of late, and I hope he can overcome, because he is potentially the second most talented wrestler, behind Shawn Michaels, on the continent, but hasn't wrestled at all like that of late. Mysterio was press slammed by Boyfriend and thrown 3 rows deep. He climaxed it with a leap off the top rope like a missile, going down with a headbutt onto the floor on Boyfriend. Finally Guerrera made Metal submit to the chicken wing. Because of Mysterio, this was an excellent match, but again too short to be rated any higher. 4 stars. Match 3. Pegasus Kid and Too Cold Scorpio and Tito Santana defeated Jerry Estrada and La Parka and Blue Panther in 14:51. This match was a dual purpose. First off, Pegasus Kid was unbelievable, and Panther was great working with him. Parka and Estrada did their deal designed to turn Parka face. Scorpio was pretty rough in spots but good in others. Santana was totally lost, but at least was in the ring very little. Most of the match saw Parka and Estrada argue. Pegasus did a mid-air twist into a sunset flip. He also suplexed Panther over the top rope and followed it with a tope. The fan reaction was interesting here. The Pegasus team was supposed to be the faces since the Mexicans are all traditional heels. However, Pegasus came out to very mild polite applause because the fans know him from ch. 22 EMLL tapes since he was on a few months back as Vampiro's tag team partner as a face. The fans didn't have a clue who Scorpio was. I expected fans to cheer Santana because he was always popular with Mexicans in Los Angeles, but he was booed. All 3 heels were booed coming out, but once the bout started, the crowd totally got into the Mexican team as the favorites even though they played heel. Pegasus missed a diving headbutt on Panther and Scorpio missed a moonsault on Panther. At one point Scorpio was ready to be pinned and Parka and Estrada kept fighting amongst one another and breaking up each other's near falls on Scorpio. Santana came in for a quick spot and was again a fish out of water. Estrada held Santana for Parka to tope him, but Santana moved and Parka toped Estrada. Scorpio then came off the top rope with a crossbody, but the heels moved and he hit Santana. At this point, Parka and Estrada were going at it on the floor and Pegasus was in with Panther, going back and forth with near falls until Pegasus turned Panther's attempt at a powerbomb into a Hurricane Rana. 3.5 stars. Match 4. Octagon and El Hijo del Santo defeated Love Machine and Eddie Guerrero in a 2/3 fall double mask vs double hair match in 22:29. First fall saw the Gringo Locos debut a move where Machine had Santo on his shoulders and Guerrero came off the top rope with a Frankensteiner, which is the first time anyone can recall anyone pulling the move off. Shinjiro Otani and Wild Pegasus tried the move in the finals of the SG Junior Tag League a few weeks back on Guerrero himself, but Otani didn't hit it right. That was the first pin. Guerrero then superplexed Octagon off the top rope and Machine splashed him for the pin, which is known as the Power and Glory finisher, taken from the former WWF tag team that invented the finisher. Santo and Octagon did a double tope after making a second fall comeback. Guerrero then did a Frankensteiner off the top and pinned Santo, meaning Octagon had to pin both or they'd go down in straight falls. Machine backdropped Octagon, who turned the move into a Frankensteiner on Guerrero for the surprise pin. Octagon then hit his leg sweep and Octagon special submission to even the score. Third fall saw one near fall after another with Santo and Guerrero. Guerrero tried for a submission on Santo with a camel clutch, but Octagon broke it up. Santo got the camel clutch on Guerrero, but Machine superkicked his brains out. Machine got the STF on Santo, but Octagon literally punted Machine. Guerrero got the Gloria special on Octagon, but Santo saved. Santo did a backward superplex on Guerrero, but Machine saved. Machine and Guerrero did a double tope, although Guerrero got his legs caught in the ropes going through. Santo reversed a superplex into a super gourd buster for a near fall, and later did a sunset flip over the top rope to the floor onto Guerrero, and neither man killed the other. Finally, behind Ref Durante's back, Machine gave Octagon the martinete, tombstone pile driver, the deadly finisher, and scored the pin, leaving Santo against both. The Gringo Locos did a combo clothesline and German suplex on Santo, who kicked out. They did the power and glory on Santo, who kicked out. Santo recovered with a Santo dive on Guerrero. At this point Machine was on the top rope ready to do a plancha on Santo, but Blue Panther, Machine's most hated enemy, which was probably the single only cognizant fact that 10A and Cruz didn't bring up, knocked Machine off the top rope and gave him a regular pile driver. In Mexico the regular pile driver is both illegal and devastating, but not as devastating as the tombstone. Don't ask why, it's just one of those pro wrestling truisms, which is why Octagon went out in an ambulance and Machine didn't. Santo pinned Machine, which left Santo with Guerrero. Guerrero used a Liger Bomb for a near fall, a belly-to-belly superplex for a near fall, a Frankensteiner off the top for a near fall, a Dragon Suplex for a near fall, and when he went for the second Dragon Suplex, Santo reversed it into a cradle to score the pin in 22-29. After the match, Machine and Guerrero cut most of their hair off with scissors before going backstage and getting the rest taken off. They showed a clip later in the show of Guerrero getting shaved backstage with the electric razor. Live, this was one of the best matches I've ever seen and one of the 2 best matches of the year in the United States. 5 stars star. Match 5. Perro Aguayo beat Conan El Barbaro in a steel cage match in 1754. This match was weird, but it was actually better on pay-per-view than Live because there was so much drama and storyline to it. The work was pretty basic, at some points not good and good in other points, but bloody as hell. They used the over-the-top and out cage match rule, which always hurts matches of these types. An interesting trivia note is that Aguayo, even though he's been wrestling for 25 years, had never been in a cage match. Conan gave Aguayo 2 hot shots into the cage and he juiced at 3 o'clock. There was another miscommunication with ref Pepe Casas counting falls and them doing pins attempts early when pins didn't count. Aguayo's comeback usually wound up with his double foot stomps. As Aguayo was taking control, Guerrero and Boyfriend came out and threw a coke in Aguayo's eyes and Guerrero threw brass knucks to Conan. Conan gave Aguayo 3 shots with the knucks to bloody him up. Probably the single best or worst camera shot in history was the crevices in Aguayo's forehead being shoved into the cage and the incredible amount of blood that flowed. Conan then hit the Niagara driver. He kept up on Aguayo, who was bloody, until Los Hermanos Dinamita did a run-in which blew the top off the place. Conan climbed the cage and was about to get out when Cien Caras punched Conan, who crotched himself on the top rope and fell in. Aguayo did the double foot stomp off the top rope on Conan and escaped to win the match. The only negative was at some point a fan hit Guerrero, who lost his cool and forgot about the show and went after the fan. Conan went into the crowd and there was genuine fear a riot could happen. It was amazing to see the crowd back up when Conan got in, as a contrast to American crowd who laugh in the face of the wrestlers when they threaten them. Of course, I have little doubt Conan would have hit anyone who tried anything. Aguayo wound up going in the crowd and quelling everything down. Aguayo is old with no fancy moves and not what one watching him for the first time would consider a great worker, but nobody that age in this business works harder, has more fire and intensity and builds drama like he can. 3.5 stars. Yet another in a string of lawsuits against World Championship Wrestling was filed on November 7 by former prelim wrestler Charlie Norris. Norris filed suit in U.S. District Court in Minneapolis, suing both the company and Greg Gagne for breach of contract and racial discrimination. The suit asks for both compensatory and punitive damages and for attorney's fees. WCW offered no comment to the Minneapolis Star-Tribune when asked about the suit. Norris, 31, a Chippewa Indian, complained that upon joining with WCW he was told to perform stereotypical Indian actions in the ring. He said he reluctantly went along with those demands by his supervisors, but when he ultimately refused, saying he felt demeaned by doing the screams, dances, tomahawk chops and war whoops, he was then fired for having a bad attitude and being lazy and uncooperative. Norris claimed in the newspaper article that upon joining WCW, he was sent to their training camp and claimed he was made fun of and demeaned by them trying to teach him how to dance like an Indian. Norris said Gagne made things worse by calling him Big Chief and repeatedly demonstrating how the promotion wanted him to dance in the ring. Norris' suit claims the company reneged on increasing his weekly salary from $800 to $1,500 per week after 3 months and refused to give him any extra money for appearing on a pay-per-view show, and reneged on promises to pay for his travel and costume expenses. Norris claimed WCW would only promote whites as wrestlers and relegated all others to character actors who were to be presented only by their racial stereotype. He said on interviews they wanted him to refer to his grandfather as Chief Big Sky and talk about going on the warpath during his interviews. The suit is the latest of many by former performers outstanding against WCW, which include Rick Rude, Ranger Ross, also on racial discrimination charges, and most recently Missy Hyatt. If Ross, Norris and even Hyatt eventually prevail in court, it would set a precedent as far as any characterizations of racial or ethnic stereotypes, something that has been a part of wrestling since its inception, and would force change in the wrestling industry. WCW and TBS have gained a reputation within wrestling as being easy touches when it comes to settling suits out of court, which has in part led to the more frequent recent suits which many would say are being filed in the belief they'll be settled well before going to court. 1994 Wrestling Observer Awards. As is tradition this time of year, it's time for the readers voting for the Wrestling Observer Awards. These will be the 15th annual awards, the only awards not only international in scope and participation but the only awards acknowledged by wrestling media throughout the world. They should be even more interesting this year because so many categories where winners in the past have been almost automatics are up for grabs. I expect few categories to be outright runaways. The time frame of these awards are the period from December 1, 1991 through November 30, 1994. Anything taking place between those dates should be what is considered. If something, such as a match, takes place either before or after those dates, it shouldn't be taken into consideration. Ballots won't be accepted until December 1st, so don't mail until after Thanksgiving. Ballots will be accepted through the first week of January and results will be released in the annual mid-January awards double issue of The Observer. If you have a written opinion regarding who you believe should win a certain award and why, you are encouraged to send it in as quickly as possible for consideration in the letters section. Category Awards. Pick a first, second and a third place finisher in each category. Points will be awarded on a 5-3-2 basis. The winner of the award is determined by total points. 1. Wrestler of the Year. This is for a combination of being both an important and influential wrestler in a positive manner in the wrestling business over the past year, combined with being a great performer in the ring during the same time period. Last year's top three were Vader, Kenta Kobashi, and Bret Hart. 2. Most Outstanding Wrestler. This is based on ring work as the only criterion. Simply, the three best wrestlers in the world over the past year. The ones who put on the most consistently excellent matches and individual performances. Last year's top three were Kenta Kobashi, Manami Toyota, and Toshiaki Kawada. 3. Best Babyface, based on a combination of drawing power and heat generated in the buildings. This is strictly a popularity contest with ring work not considered a criterion. Last year's top three were Atsushi Onita, Sting, and Bret Hart. 4. Best Heel, again, based on a combination of drawing power and secondarily on ability to garner and maintain heat. Last year's top three were Vader, Jerry Lawler, and Yokozuna. 5. Feud of the Year. This should be based on a combination of having a compelling storyline and angles and having great matches on a consistent basis that strengthen the box office. A feud must be a series of matches, not based on one individual match. Last year's top three were Jerry Lawler vs. Bret Hart, Mitsuharu Misawa & Co. vs. Toshiaki Kawada & Co., and Vader vs. Cactus Jack. 6. Tag Team of the Year, for the best working tag team during the previous year. Last year's top three were Brian Pillman and Steve Austin, Tom Pritchard and Jimmy Del Rey and Manami Toyota and Toshio Yamada. 7. Most Improved. This is based on having made the biggest strides in ring work over the balloting period. This is not for someone who has always had the ability that is being given their first push. Last year's top three were Tracy Smothers, Marcus Bagwell, and Sabu. 8. Most Unimproved, based on the biggest decline in ring work over the same balloting period. Last year's top three were Rick Rude, Sid Vicious, and Lex Luger. 9. Most Obnoxious. This is for the individual in wrestling, whether it be a wrestler, announcer, promoter or anyone else associated with the business that for whatever reason you can't stand. Last year's top three were Vince McMahon, Eric Bischoff and Dusty Rhodes. 10. Best on Interviews. Who gave the best interviews on a consistent basis over the last year? Reputation from previous years shouldn't be taken into account and it should be based on the entire year rather than one or two specific interviews. Last year's top three were Jim Cornette, Ric Flair, and Jerry Lawler. 11. Most Charismatic. What wrestler has to do the least to get the most out of it? Last year's top three were Ric Flair, Atsushi Onita, and Sting. 12. Best Technical Wrestler. This is for having the ability to use a wide variety of technical wrestling maneuvers and execute them within the context of putting together great matches. Last year's top 3 were Hiroshi Hayes, Jushin Liger, and Kenta Kobashi. 13. Bruiser Brody Memorial Award. This is for a wrestler who uses brawling tactics to put together the best matches during the previous year. Last year's top 3 were Cactus Jack, Vader, and Stan Hansen. 14. Best Flying Wrestler. This is for the wrestler who does the most innovative and solidly executed flying maneuvers within the context of putting together good matches. Last year's top 3 were Jushin Liger, Rey Mysterio Jr., and Manami Toyota. 15. Most Overrated Wrestler. The wrestler who gets the biggest push despite lacking in ring ability. Last year's top 3 were Sid Vicious, Lex Luger, and Hulk Hogan. 16. Most Underrated Wrestler. The wrestler with the most ability, who, for whatever reason, doesn't get a push commensurate with their talent. This should be based on work during this past year and not something based on reputation as a worker garnered years ago. Last year's top 3 were Bobby Eaton, Wild Pegasus, and Terry Taylor. 17. Best Promotion. Should be based primarily on which group puts together the best live product on a consistent basis, and secondarily, the ability to sell that product at the box office. Theoretically, the top pick should be a company at or near the top on both categories. Last year's top 3 were All Japan Pro Wrestling, All Japan Women, and New Japan Pro Wrestling. 18. Best Television Show. Weekly television shows only are eligible, which eliminates All Japan Women and JWP from consideration. This is for the best consistent week-to-week show, not for a specific episode of a specific program. Last year's top 3 were All Japan Pro Wrestling, Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and WWF Monday Night Raw. 19. Match of the Year. Pick the 3 best matches, in order, from the time period listed. Last year's top 3 were Manami Toyota and Toshio Yamada vs Dynamite Kansai and Mayumi Ozaki on April 11 in Osaka, Steve Williams vs Kenta Kobashi on August 31 in Toyohashi, and Akira Hokuto vs Shinobu Kandori on April 2 in Yokohama. 20. Rookie of the Year. This is based on ring performance and not how someone is pushed. By the standard of the category, a rookie wrestler is someone who hasn't had a full-time wrestling job with a company that runs regular shows, more than 2 per week, prior to September 1, 1993. Good luck. Last year's top 3 were Jun Akiyama, Bobby Blaze, and Smoking Guns. 21. Manager of the Year. Self-explanatory. Last year's top 3 were Jim Cornette, winning for the 8th time in the past 9 years, Tammy Fitch and Ron Wright. 22. Best Television Announcer. Play-by-play men only are eligible. Color men have a category of their own. Last year's top 3 were Jim Ross, for the 6th straight year, Tony Schiavone and Bob Caudle. 23. Worst Television Announcer. All announcers are eligible. Last year's top 3 were Gorilla Monsoon, Eric Bischoff, and Corey Macklin. Category B Awards. Pick 1 in each category. Winner chosen on basis of first-place votes. 1. Best Major Wrestling Card of the Year. All Japan Women Dream Slam I4 Halves Yokohama, last year's winner. 2. Worst Major Wrestling Card of the Year. WCW Fall Brawl 919 Houston, last year's winner. 3. Best Wrestling Maneuver. Vader Moonsault, last year's winner. 4. Most Disgusting Promotional Tactic. Cactus Jack Amnesia Angle, last year's winner. 5. Best Color Commentator. Bobby Heenan, last year's winner. 6. Reader's Personal Favorite Wrestler. Ric Flair, last year's winner. 7. Reader's Personal Least Favorite Wrestler. Sid Vicious, last year's winner. 8. Worst Wrestler. Rookies Ineligible. The Equalizer, last year's winner. 9. Worst Tag Team. Colossal Kongs, last year's winners. 10. Worst Weekly Television Show. GWF, last year's winner. 11. Worst Manager. Mr. Fuji, last year, and every other year's winner. 12. Worst Match of the Year. 4 Doinks vs Bam Bam Bigelow and Head Shrinkers and Bastion Booger 1124 Boston Survivor Series, last year's winner. 13. Worst Feud of the Year. Undertaker vs Giant Gonzalez, last year's winner. 14. Worst On Interviews. Mr. Fuji, last year's winner. 15. Worst Promotion of the Year. WCW, last year's winner. 16. Best Booker. Jim Cornette, last year's winner. 17. Best Promoter. Shohei Baba, last year's winner. 18. Best Gimmick. The Undertaker, last year's winner. 19. Worst Gimmick. Shockmaster, last year's winner. 20. Most embarrassing wrestler. This is for the wrestler who, when he appears on television and you have friends or family in the room with you, makes you the most embarrassed to be a wrestling fan. Bastion Booger, last year's winner. Ooh. The biggest news is that apparently Canek, the multi-time and current heavyweight champ, sent a letter to President Carlos Maines this past week that he was leaving the organization, although he was still booked on shows as of this past weekend. EMLL. No major news over the past week. The biggest show was 11/4 at Arena Mexico, headlined by Vampiro Canadiense and Atlantis and Negro Casas vs Pierrot Jr. and El Satanico and Emilio Charles Jr. Even though Charles is on the heel side, he works as a face and continues to feud with his partners. Corazon de Leon, Chris Jericho, returns as NWA middleweight champion on November 11th. Dr. Wagner Jr. is back from a broken collarbone. All Japan. They are doing an angle leading up to the tag team tournament where Giant Baba wants Mitsuharu Misawa and Kenta Kobashi to relinquish their tag team titles as is customary before every year-end tag team tournament, with the tournament winners becoming new World Tag Team Champions. But Misawa said that he'd worked hard to become and defend the tag titles and that the World Tag titles and the tag team tournament are two different things. The 11/5 TV show, which aired the second half of the Toshiaki Kawada-Steve Williams title change, only drew an 0.9 rating. And even though one can excuse part of it by the time slot being bounced around in the wee hours, for a world title change fans have waited years for, that has to be a major disappointment. New Japan. Antonio Inoki was in Las Vegas for the George Foreman-Mike Moorer fight for photo opportunities and to try and put together the Inoki-Foreman match for April 15, 1995 in a 100,000-seat stadium in North Korea to break the Hogan-Andre record, which was really 78,000. Although the 93,000 figure has been used for so many years, it's become accepted as a real number, and the fact is they sold out so far in advance they could have done a legit 100,000 if they were in a big enough building. However, with Foreman winning the title, all negotiations, whatever they really were, fell apart because no current world boxing champ is going to do a job in a mixed match to a 51-year-old. They apparently are still going to run a show that day in that building, but Inoki finally had to give up on the dream of a match with Foreman that he's had since the mid-70s. The top matches on the final tour of the year were announced. The key matches are, Norio Onaga defending the IWGP Junior strap against Wild Pegasus on November 25 and Morioka against Black Tiger on December 11 in Nagoya and against Gran Hamada on December 12 in Osaka. Hellraisers defend the IWGP Tag Team titles on November 25 in Morioka against Hiroshi Hayes and Keiji Muto. I have a feeling this will be a title change and that Hayes and Muto will then defend the belts on December 12 in Osaka against Rick and Scott Steiner. Shina Hashimoto defends the IWGP Heavyweight strap on December 13 in Osaka. They are running Osaka 2 straight nights with major shows, against Hiroshi Hayes. They are pushing this as Hayes' first shot ever at the World Heavyweight title. They also have 3 straight grudge matches with Junji Hirata, formerly Super Strong Machine, versus Masa Chono stemming from the tag tourney finals on 12/11 to 12/13, and also on December 13 will be Power Warrior and Scott Norton versus Steiners and Tatsumi Fujinami versus Riki Choshu to renew their legendary feud. As mentioned before, New Japan is interested in getting on US television, and with 500-channel expansion within a few years it is inevitable, but thus far the US stations that have contacted them are more interested in the product for international syndication in conjunction with the US market, and TV Asahi wants to maintain all international rights, and that's where the deals keep falling apart. 1029 television show airing a few early tag tourney matches only did an 0.5 rating. New Japan also failed to sell out Korakuen Hall on November 6 for a 7-match show in which 7 of the younger wrestlers would face 7 of the veterans. In every match, it was the veteran going over, with the top bouts having Hashimoto beating Manabu Nakanishi and Muto pinning Shinjiro Otani. Other Japan notes. Yet more promotions are opening up. On the women's side, formerly legends from the 1980s, Lioness Asuka and Jaguar Yokota, both coming out of long retirements. See, Nobody Really Ever Retires Except Dump Matsumoto, for the Dome show, will form their own group in 1995 using Bison Kimura and Yumi Ogura as well. Chigusa Nagayo, who is training a whole crew of new wrestlers, some of whom are making debuts shortly on JWP or AJW shows, will run her first show on her own in April of 1995 at Korakuen Hall. A new men's office called West Japan Pro Wrestling had a press conference on November 7 announcing their first show on December 22 in Kumamoto with Hiroshi Shimada, SPWF, Kenji Takano, formerly Shunji Takano, Uchu Power 10 and 20 and manager Ikamasa KY Wakamatsu. Takashi Ishikawa's Tokyo Pro Wrestling announced shows in March, May, August and November in Manila, Philippines at a 30,000-seat outdoor baseball stadium. War has a match on November 8 with Genichiro Tenryu vs Hiromichi Fuyuki in which the loser has to raft down a river. Rock and Roll Express are in on this tour. Kyoko and Takako Inoue make their first defense of their WWA tag titles on November 10 for the first wrestling show at the Hiroshima Green Dome, 15,000 seats. AAA has the building booked on November 18 and FMW before the end of the year as well. Michinoku Pro is running its own tag team tournament with Hanzo Nakajima and Blackman 2, Mexico Indy, Sato and Shiryu, Taka Michinoku, and Grand Naniwa, Pantera 2, EMLL, and Kendo, UWA. Super Delphin and Jinsei Shinzaki and Terry Boy and Mascara Magica, EMLL. Its top star, Great Sasuke, is out of action selling the injuries from the explosive double hell match with Atsushi Onita on October 30, which got an incredible amount of media attention. They blew up the ring at the 1500 hours mark, just after Onita had scored the pin. At one point in the match, Sasuke did a tope over the barbed wire but landed way short of Onita and crashed and burned. Judging from the photos, the announced crowd of 5,667 was inflated since it appeared to be about 3,500 in an outdoor parking lot with all level seating. Frank Shamrock, the younger brother of Wayne Shamrock, debuts for Pancrase on December 16. The two are actually not biological brothers since Wayne Shamrock is adopted. Akira Maeda is having to come back from his injury quicker because of poor ticket sales for the 11/19 Tokyo Ariake Coliseum show. They are putting Maeda vs Tony Halme, Ludwig Borga, on top, which means they'll probably put Borga over to try and make him a drawing card. Also they'll have Fulcon vs Willie Williams, Chris Stolman vs Yoshihisa Yamamoto, Dirk Leon Frey vs Hans Nyman and more. UFI sent out press releases to the Japanese media stating that Dan Severn was under contract to UFI and wouldn't be working the UFC on December 16, which they already have commercials all over cable for. UFI for 11:30 at Budokan Hall will headline with Nobuhiko Takada vs Gary Albright, with the winner getting a shot at Vader's belt in January. The rest of the show is nothing special, so they're trying to sell out on a one-match show. It's kind of a letdown promotion-wise with all the talk of either Vader or Albright, which would be a new matchup, or Takada Rickson Gracie, which would be a huge draw because of the popularity of the Gracies in Japan right now. Aswa. Television this weekend was built around the return 11/7 match with Sid Vicious defending the unified title against The Undertaker. Rest of the show was the typical stuff with a Moondog Battle Royal, everyone can bring in a weapon of their choice, Tommy Rich defending the Aswa title against Brian Christopher, Buddy Landell vs Doug Gilbert in a street fight, Miss Texas vs Scott Bowden, Moondogs defending Aswa tag titles against Phantoms, Spellbinder vs Doug Basham and Sergeant Victor vs Tony Williams. They have a new jobber tag team called the Cadillac Brothers, Fleetwood, and Eldorado. Bowden is getting off some great lines of late. They aired a music video to Jimmy Hart's song Memphis Monday Night Memories, which he penned earlier in the year, showing clips of legends from the past, and announcer Lance Russell then brought out Bowden, saying this is one person who will never be a legend in wrestling. Bowden said he didn't want to be a legend because half the legends are dead and have met the real Undertaker, and then said some of them are like Bill Dundee, an out-of-work Elvis impersonator. SMW. Jim Cornette and Casey O'Connor settled their illegal problems out of court over the incident where Cornette smashed in the windows of O'Connor's car with a baseball bat. Cornette paid for all repairs and legal fees, and there was an undisclosed settlement in return for O'Connor dropping any potential civil and all legal action against Cornette. Abdullah the Butcher won't be appearing against Bob Armstrong in the main events at Thanksgiving Thunder due to being in the All Japan Tag Tournament. Butcher, after agreeing to the dates, called Cornette up after the taping 1 month ago and said he couldn't be there. However, at the television tapings held on November 7, they were still building up that match, and there is no word on who will be brought in as a replacement. I hate when things like this happen, but these are the type of things that can make fans not want to come back. It was another eventful taping, although not as many happenings as the one last month. Bryant Anderson retained the TV title for the 5th week and then vacated it. The next show had Steve Armstrong face D'Lo Brown, AC Connor, for the held-up title, which Steve won via DQ when the Gangstas attacked him, but since it was a DQ, they ruled the title still vacant. The final of the 4 shows had Brian Lee beating the Nightmare, Ted Allen, to become the new champion. On the first show, which airs 11/18, Chris Condito returned and said how glad he was to be back, and Tammy Fitch told Boo Bradley that if he doesn't listen to her and Chris that Boots, his cat, would get hurt. Bryant Anderson and Tracy Smothers had a pull-apart. Jim Cornette came out and claimed that he knows Bob Armstrong is the current commissioner and said he was going to get Robert Shapiro on the case and sue to find out who the commissioner was. Bob said he'd bring the commissioner out and said the commissioner was someone who had the same moral values as he did, and brought out Scott Armstrong, and Cornette went nuts. Scott explained the reason he and Steve haven't been around is because they are working behind the scenes running the company in secret, but now with Bob going back to the commissioner's job, they are getting back in the ring. Dirty White Boy did an interview saying he didn't know why Ron Wright wasn't there, but he had a strap match on TV with Bruiser Bedlam. Cornette hit White Boy with the racket for the DQ and they were doing a double team when Wright showed up late and made the save. The 11:25 TV show has Anderson challenging Smothers to matches over Christmas week where they must be won via submission. Cornette then told the Gangstas how much he hated the Rock and Roll Express and wanted to manage them, and the Gangstas insulted Cornette and blew him off. New Jack said Cornette is just like all the hillbillies that want to own a black man. They continued the storyline where Boo Bradley wanted to be friends with Cactus Jack, but Tammy told Bradley that Jack had tried to hurt Boots, so Bradley switched gears. Jack did an interview saying he wasn't in SMW for any titles, but that he's on a mission from God to lead Bradley to heaven, which was a way for Jack to say on the air that he's in the missionary position. Actually, all of Jack's interviews on all the shows contained remarks like that. The Gangstas had a match with Brian Lee and Lance Storm, ending when Condito hit Lee with a garbage can and he was pinned. Condito then hid under the ring so ref Mark Durante Skirtus, as he was announced, couldn't see him. Jack then came out and he, Lee and Storm surrounded the ring. Storm pulled Condito out and Jack hit Condito over the head with a garbage can, which led to a match on the following show. That show opened with Bob Armstrong talking to White Boy and Ron Wright, telling them a sports agent from California is putting pressure on SMW because he has a major superstar coming in and wants a title match immediately rather than having to work his way up, and White Boy agreed to the match. Apparently Cornette doesn't even know who the superstar is. Cornette, after being insulted by the Gangstas, asked the Rock and Roll Express if he could manage them at Christmas Chaos. Cactus and Lee asked for Falls Count Anywhere matches with Bradley and Condito at Christmas Chaos. Anderson and Smothers did a submission demonstration. First Anderson made James Adkins submit to his armbar. Then Smothers did an exhibition where he caught Anthony Michaels in the figure four, but then Anderson attacked Smothers and put the armbar on him. Smothers sold it big. Anderson kept getting pulled off and kept putting the hold back on. Gangstas did an interview saying it'll be Rock and Roll Express last chance at them and that they need Cornette because they can't win without him, but he won't make enough of a difference. Condito vs. Jack was the best match at the taping, ending when Condito collided with Bradley at ringside and Jack hit the double-arm DDT for the win. Tammy sprayed stuff in Jack's eyes and Condito laid him out and told Bradley to jump off the top rope on him. Bradley refused. Finally Tammy threatened to hurt the cat and Bradley got on the top rope, but before he could jump, Lee made the save. On the final show, Rock and Rolls, in a videotaped package since they were in Japan this week, finally agreed to take Cornette as their manager. With Rock and Rolls in Japan, house shows were down to 8 wrestlers with 2 singles and a tag, followed by the same 8 guys working an 8-man tag match on top, which is said to be infinitely better than the battle royals they used to headline spot shows with. They ran an angle at the 11/5 house show in Morristown, Tennessee, where they had White Boy in a cage match against both Cornette and Bedlam. White Boy had both beat when Anderson threw the tennis racket to Bedlam, who hit White Boy. Cornette then pinned White Boy in the middle. Anderson, when it comes to face and voice and some mannerisms, is so much like his father that it's scary. Expect the Heavenly Bodies back sometime early in 1995. ECW. Tons of news from the weekend, including 3 title changes. At the TV taping on November 4th in Hamburg, Pennsylvania, 2 Cold Scorpio beat Jason for the TV title, only to lose it later in the taping to Dean Malenko. Public Enemy regained the tag team titles at the 11/5 CCW Arena card in a match with Cactus Jack and Mikey Whipwreck. As part of the legal settlement with WCW for WCW using the When Worlds Collide name on the pay-per-view over the weekend, WCW will send Steve Austin, Sherry Martel and Kevin Sullivan to the 11/19 show, which goes head-to-head with Dennis Coraluzzo's NWA tournament, which in and of itself is the subject of yet another dispute this week with Jim Crockett. Austin and Shane Douglas, managed by Martel, face Ron Simmons and Scorpio, while Sullivan and Cactus Jack face Public Enemy. The 11/5 show drew what was said to be the group's largest crowd to date, about 1,050 fans, and up until the main event disaster with Chris Benoit vs. Sabu, threatened to be the best show the group has put on in several months. The show opened with a guitar player playing the national anthem and screwing it up, A very inside joke aimed at WWF and WCW for having the anthem screwed up on major recent shows. Actually, it seems 40% of this group is inside knocks at WWF and WCW. 911 then came out and chokeslammed the guitar player. Mr. Hughes subbed for Dorothy Osborne, who went with Dennis Corraluzzo instead and lost to Scorpio. Tommy Cairo juiced a major gusher, so his match with Tommy Dreamer was stopped on blood. Douglas kept the ECW title, pinning Ron Simmons, who wasn't over in the least, and even though he was supposed to be the face, got on the house mic and yelled at the fans who didn't care about him. Douglas won cleanly with a pin, but afterwards Scorpio comes out and the two double-team Douglas and leave him laying when Scorpio hits a moonsault on him. Then Sandman, in dark glasses and tape on his eyes, comes out. Sandman said he didn't regret anything he did during his career. Anyway, it wound up with both Woman and Peaches, Sandman's wife, although the two are separated in the ECW storyline, coming out. Peaches, complete with a surgically endowed new body and a string bikini top, comes out and tells Sandman how she's now different, but of course Sandman can't see. Anyway, they end up kissing and making up when Woman hits the ring and hits Peaches with a stick and starts threatening to hit Sandman, who is still acting like he can't see, which of course brings out Dreamer. As Dreamer and Woman argue, Sandman pulls the patches off his eyes and the glasses and grabs the stick that Woman had dropped, and destroys Dreamer with it. Woman then announces her new protege will be Sandman once again. Sandman lit up a cigarette and dropped the ashes on both Peaches and Dreamer, laying out. Dean Malenko then beat Tasmaniac with the ether on the towel finish. Public Enemy regained the tag titles from Whipwreck and Cactus when Johnny Grunge hit Whipwreck with a baseball bat coming off the top rope. During the match, Sabu and Rocco Rock got into it when Rocco set up tables and was going to break them with a splash. The show ended with Benoit Sabu. After the match ended 2 o'clock in, 911 ran in and chokeslammed Benoit, and there was a wild brawl for about 10 o'clock. At the 11/4 taping before 355, Chad Austin came out and said ECW was a small-time promotion with no talent and that he's joined a real promotion, SMW. This is because SMW is running 4 shows in the Philadelphia area in 2 weeks. Douglas came out and beat him up, forcing him to say ECW is number 1 on the house mic. Public Enemy faced Hack Myers and 911 in a match where 911 chokeslammed his partner and both opponents. Jason and Pitbulls then attacked Paul E. dangerously and brawled with 911. They did a match with Tommy Dreamer vs Stan Harris with Cindy Lane, and Woman hit Cindy Lane with the stick, and after the match, Dreamer hit her with the stick as well. They're building toward a feud in December with Sabu and Taz vs Public Enemy. They did a 6-man with Hughes and Douglas and Hack Myers vs Benoit and Simmons and Scorpio, which ended with Hughes and Douglas turning on Myers and Benoit walking out on Simmons and Scorpio and Myers getting pinned. Finale saw Cactus Jack beat Sabu in a Falls Count Anywhere using the elbow off the apron to the floor in a 4 stars match. Here and there. After the success of AAA in Chicago in July, an independent group is bringing a major show to the International Amphitheater in Chicago on December 3rd with Mil Mascaras and Tinieblas Sr. and Villano 3 as the babyface trio on top, not sure of their opponents, plus Mini Ninja Turtles vs Pequeno Goliath and Grand Nikolai, Super Raton and Super Pinocho vs Scorpio and Scorpio Jr., Lola Gonzalez and Lady Apache vs Vicky Carranza and La Diabolica and Super Astro and Transformer vs Zandokan and Al Engendro. Also in Chicago, this time on November 4th, was a television taping for the new American Wrestling Federation. Tita Santana and Sergeant Slaughter, who are both wrestling as well, are in charge of the group, as apparently they have a big money investor who put up $100,000 for production and a taping and paid the talent great. They are looking to shop the tape for syndication. Overall, the production was said to be very good, taped in a television studio with about 120 fans, but the wrestling was said to be weak and dated looking. Ken Resnick, Mick Karch and Terry Taylor did the announcing and Missy Hyatt did the interviews. Aside from Santana and Slaughter, they used Nails, Sid Vicious, Tommy Rich, doing a young Playboy gimmick about 10 years too late, Coco Ware, Warlord, Greg Valentine, Tony Atlas, Chris Adams, Johnny Gunn, Jim Powers, Sabu, who was told to tone himself down because they want to keep their wrestling inside the ring, and Mr. Hughes with Sheik Adnan El-Kassi and the Genius, Lenny Poffo, as managers, and Jim Brunzel was involved as well. I wonder how many people are going to lose how much money in this business over the next few years because they don't realize wrestling can only survive by constant forward evolution, and going back in time is guaranteed failure, unless you have someone like a Hogan who has real drawing power. Old-time WWF wrestling is dead. The groups that have a chance are the groups that get on television first with a new concept, Whether it be a Japanese, Mexican, ECW, fake shoot fights or another new concept. None are guaranteed winners, but recycling guys nobody cares about is a guaranteed loser. Jim Crockett's first television taping took place on November 5 in Dallas before 350 fans. Pretty much with the exception of Mo-Dib, nobody was over, but he was over huge. They changed his name to Tony Norris, which is his real name, but fans kept chanting Mo-Dib anyway. So on next week's show, he's going back to Mo-Dib. The highlight was a match where Norris faced Valentine, billed as North American champ, in a non-title match. Valentine collided with manager Skander Akbar and was pinned. After the match, Valentine and Black Bart destroyed Akbar, which was supposed to be Akbar's babyface turn, but instead got Valentine and Bart over as the second and third top babyface in the group. The idea is to build up with Valentine against Kevin Von Erich, with Von Erich managed by Akbar, starting late this month. Tully Blanchard seemingly started a heel turn as well. Blanchard and Chris Adams faced Michael Hayes and Scott Putski, also cheered even though heels. The babyface/heel barrier is becoming inconsequential in Dallas, and I'm starting to believe something that I'd have never believed even 6 months ago but believe now. Ultimately the future of this business is no babyfaces and heels in the traditional role, but Japan-like where fans cheer who they want no matter what role they play. Hayes accidentally KO'd Putski, causing them to lose. Blanchard after the match began talking about the Horseman in his past and said something to the effect of all Adams ever has done is wrestle locally. Hayes then interrupted their argument and bragged that they shouldn't argue because he was the one who won the match for them, which then brought out Putski to argue with Hayes. Also, Black Bart pinned Junkyard Dog when Valentine pulled Dog's legs. Even though Jim Crockett is part of the NWA, he isn't going to recognize whomever wins the 11-19 tournament. I don't think he'll create a world champ himself but instead use Valentine's North American as the top strap. Jim Hellwig, Ultimate Warrior, is being advertised for an indie show on November 19 in Harlingen, Texas. They did a show on November 5 in that city and drew 1,500, which is a phenomenal crowd for an indie show with no big names, using a Jason the Terrible, former Puerto Rico manager Rico Suave, versus a Doink, Dusty Wolf, on top. Chris Benoit and Too Cold Scorpio tore the house down in Fullerton, California on November 7 before just 115 fans, doing a 4 1/4 stars match, said to be better than any match on the pay-per-view except The Mask vs. Hair, and better than any match in Mexicali on November 4 by someone who attended all 3 shows, which is really high praise having been to 2 of the 3 shows. NWC on November 19 at the Silver Nugget Casino in Las Vegas has a one-night tournament with The Thug, Doink the Kiern, Volcano Kid, Paul Orndorff, Santana, Iron Sheik, Terry Funk, and Greg Valentine. MUF has a show 11/12 in North Carroll High School with Road Warrior Hawk vs. Warlord and Brutus Beefcake vs. Iron Sheik plus Cactus Jack underneath. Boy, is there a copyright infringement suit about to take place. A group in Australia is running cards under the name World Championship Wrestling. AAA. Aside from the pay-per-view, the major show of the weekend was a TV taping on November 4 in Mexicali in front of 4,000 fans in a 12,000-seat outdoor bullfighting arena. In a match that probably won't make television, they used the Power Rangers, who are 3 relatively small green guys, one of whom is Vagabundo, the newcomer that everyone is raving about. Anyway, while he's green in spots, his high spots are unbelievable. He reminds me of 1-2-3 Kid at a similar age and really is even more acrobatic. Anyway, just before the finish, 2 of the Rangers did simultaneous space-flying tiger drops. Considering as best as anyone can remember, only 3 wrestlers previous in history had ever done that move, Satoru Sayama, Hikari Fukuoka and Great Sasuke. To see 2 guys do it at the same time was something. Then they ran the minis tag with Mascara de Sagrada and Octagon Cheeto over Espectrito and Jurito Estrada, with Octagon Cheeto beating Espectrito in the 3rd fall with the leg sweep and Octagon special submission. After the match they did interviews with both to set up an upcoming bout where Espectrito defends the World Minis belt against Octagon Cheeto. Best match on the show was next with Phobia and Psicosis and Fuerza Guerrera over Rey Mysterio Jr. and Heavy Metal and El Puma, with the heels winning in 2 straight. In the first fall, Phobia made Heavy submit, which shocked everyone because when was the last time a local made a national superstar submit to win a fall? Second fall saw Fuerza make Heavy submit to set up an upcoming tag title match against Heavy and Latin Lover. Rey Mysterio then captured the IWC middleweight title from Mysterioso in a 3-fall match lasting only 1,300 hours. Most of the bout centered around Mysterioso's second, Fuerza Guerrera, turning on him, and finally in the 3rd fall after all that happened, Rey made Mysterioso submit to win the title. Octagon and Santo and Latin Lover beat La Parka and Jerry Estrada and Blue Panther in 2 straight wins. Estrada and Parka turned on each other, leaving Panther fighting all 3 faces by himself and getting pinned. Parka got over on the turn as a face much better here than in Los Angeles. Final was an 8-man with Conan and Love Machine and Eddie Guerrero and Madonna's Boyfriend losing 2 straight to Cien Caras and Mascareño 2000 and Universo 2000 and Pero Aguayo when Conan submitted to Cien and Pero in the second fall. It was a good heated brawl with everyone working hard but not a well-focused match. After the match, Aguayo and Mascareño 2000 argued with each other. Jerry Estrada won a hair versus hair match with Stuka on October 31 in his hometown of Monclova. Also on that show, Cien Caras and his brothers teamed with Parka against the Gringo Locos. It wound up with the Dinamita turning on Parka in the final fall, causing him to lose, and they beat him to death, once again, beginning his face turn. On November 1 in Sartillo they held a one-night tag tourney won by Conan and Madonna's Boyfriend beating Aguayo and Latin in the finals. Final was said to be not any good, but the show stealer was said to be Conan and Boyfriend over Machine and Guerrero in the battle of the heel teams via countout. Blue Panther kept the middleweight title beating Mariachi on October 30 in Torreon. If there is another pay-per-view, the tentative plan is for a date in April. WCW. Add Arnold Anderson's name to the booking committee. Steve Austin won't be managed by Sherry Martel after all. The idea was changed and Sherry will wind up being Harlem Heat's manager since Johnny Attitude was already dropped. Sherry taped matches with Heat, who will be getting a major push for a feud in 1995 with the Road Warriors, at the Disney tapings, which were largely uneventful this time out. The Bruise Brothers already quit over not wanting to do a job on television at Disney for Marcus Bagwell and The Patriot. Steve Keirn debuted a new Skinner-type gimmick but with a different name. Ric Flair had a meeting with the wrestlers at Disney saying that Eric Bischoff is in charge of everything administratively and if there's any problem in that regard go to him, but that he is in charge of anything to do with the wrestling product, so if anyone has anything to say or any questions, they should contact him. He said despite anything you hear, he is happy in his role. WCW has an offer on the table for a new 2-year contract for Hulk Hogan, but as of press time it wasn't signed. Everyone seems to assume it's a given it will be signed. It may not happen quickly. We're told that the letter in the recent Observer talking about Flair and his daughter the night of the Havoc show was only partially right. The part about the daughter wanting to jump the rail during the match with Hogan was true, but the part in the hotel lobby, those involved don't seem to remember anything like that happening. Television ratings saw WCW Saturday on October 29 do a 2.5, which is expected since the ratings always go up the Saturday after an important pay-per-view show, while Sunday did a 1.9 and Pro a 1.6. Steve Regal and Gene Paul Levesque will form a heel tag team. Some talk of bringing Wayne Bloom and Mike Enos in as a tag team doing a baseball player gimmick. Weekend house shows drew about 2,000 in Tupelo, Mississippi, 1,000 in Kansas City and 1,500 in Springfield, Missouri, which can't be considered bad since the headline matches were Sting and Dustin Rhodes vs Arnold Anderson and Bunkhouse Buck in cage matches on top. Reports were the cage matches were awful, 6 o'clock, no blood, etc. When Dave Sullivan's entrance music sounds, the reaction is a total heel reaction and brings out cheers of Hogan sucks and we want Flair almost every night. On November 6 in Springfield, Missouri, Vader's back went out 3 o'clock into a match with Guardian Angel. They called an ambulance, but apparently everything turned out okay and he wasn't supposed to even miss any shots. The year-end shows in Chicago and Minneapolis will be headlined by Hogan and Sting vs Avalanche and Butcher managed by Kevin Sullivan, Rhodes vs Anderson bullrope match, Stars and Stripes vs Pretty Wonderful tag title match and Duggan defending the U.S. title against Vader. WCW has house shows set for 113 in San Diego, 120 in Cleveland and 122 in Pittsburgh. WWF. Some television taping notes from 11/7 Raw. Jerry Lawler, who replaced Randy Savage on Color, did a King's Court with Owen Hart talking about Survivor Series, saying he'd never throw in the towel. By the way, for whatever this is worth, word on the street is that Backlund will win the title and hold it until the spring, so it won't be a quickie, and they have no actual plans to take it from him, nor has a decision been made who eventually will. Doink on this show didn't look to be Ray Apollo, although not sure. Jeff Jarrett did an interview talking about a new wrestler coming in called Portuguese Man of War. Man of War, who may be PJ Walker, won a squash but screwed up the finish, which they retaped later. Ted DiBiase got in the ring and offered him money and he turned it down, establishing him as a face. All the heels on the opposing team at Survivors jumped Razor Ramon and left him laying. They did a tryout with a guy named Matt Hardy who was from North Carolina, who did 3 great moves including a Scorpio Splash for the finish, but was really green, but got over by doing the moves. On the live Raw, Bret Hart and Davey Boy Smith beat Jim Neidhart and Owen Hart in a decent 2100 hours match with Hart making Neidhart submit to the sharpshooter, which should end their disappointing feud. They built up a 1-2-3 Kid vs Bob Backlund match. A Razor Ramon vs Diesel match which will probably headline a Raw ended with both Survivor's teams coming to ringside and winding up in the ring for the DDQ. Backlund beat Kid with the chicken wing. He wouldn't break the hold, so Hart came out and they got into it after the match with Hart putting Backlund in the sharpshooter. Monday Night Raw starts in Mexico in November. Major upturn in the ratings this past week. Monday Night Raw on October 31st did a 3.1 with Backlund vs Luger, which is the highest rating for the show in 3 months. Action Zone with the 4 1/4 stars tag match did a strong 2.1, while Mania set its all-time record with a 1.9. The actual attendance for Madison Square Garden on October 29th was 9,646, paying $205,639, which shows that virtually everyone is buying the expensive seats. Actual crowd for the Jacques Rougeau retirement show was 15,534, paid with 16,843 in the building, so the released figure of 18,500 was a little inflated. At the taping, Alundra Blaze did an interview talking about her Tokyo Dome match with Bull Nakano, which seems to guarantee a title change because why else would they acknowledge the match in the WWF? From what the rumor is, they'll be adding that match at the last minute to Survivor Series. Adding that match at the last minute to Survivor Series. Adding that match at the last minute to Survivor Series. Adding that match at the last minute to Survivor Series. Adding that match at the last minute to Survivor Series. Adding that match at the last minute to Survivor Series. Adding that match at the last minute to Survivor Series. Adding that match at the last minute to Survivor Series. Adding that match at the last minute to Survivor